Hello guys, welcome back to Solidity Basics. In this section, we'll be covering mapping. Mapping is a concept that you might have already come across in other programming language like Python or JavaScript. We basically have a key type mapped to a value type. The key type can be any built-in value like integer, string, or any contract address. And the value type can be of any built-in type or another mapping type or an array. So basically, if you have a mapping, you have some keys pointing to some values. This could be anything like an integer, string, or a contract address, and these could be any values. These could be mapping as well. Uh, so you have two levels of mapping, and you have two level of keys pointing to some values. So this is nested mapping for you. You should remember that mappings are not iterable in Solidity. Now we'll go through our example smart contract. We have two smart contracts here. One demonstrates a basic mapping and the other one demonstrates a nested mapping. So the syntax for declaring a mapping is this. You have an address type map to a UINT256 and we have three functions: get, set and remove. Get helps us in fetching a value stored against a key in our map. So here we'll get the value, whatever value is stored against the key will pass in here. The set value sets a value against a key in our mapping. So we pass in the value we want to store and the key we want to store it against, and it will store that in our mapping. Remove value removes the value stored against a key. So whatever key we pass in here, the value stored against it is removed and the key is set to the default value. In nested mapping, we have an address key type mapped to another mapping which has a UINT256 key type mapped to Boolean values. So at the top level, we have address values as keys, and then at the lower level, we have UINT256 values as key. Finally, we have Boolean values stored at the lowest level of our mapping. Again, we have three functions here: get, set, and remove, and these work a little bit differently than the ones that we have discussed before because we are using nested mapping here. So in nested mapping, in order to get a value, we need two keys, the top level and the lower level key, and then we'll get the value corresponding to these keys. To set a value again, we need two keys and a value that we need to store. So we have the top level key and then the lower level key and then the value that we want to store. And for removing the value, the same pattern, we need two keys to point to the value that we want to remove, and then the value, that value is basically set to the default value of that data type. So let's check this out on Remix ID. We have a contract loaded here. We'll compile the contract and then we'll deploy it. We have deployed the first mapping contract which demonstrates the basic mapping, and we have the contract here. We have the remove, set and get functions. So we'll set some values against some address values. So we'll set some value against this contract address. Let's say 100, and then we'll set some value against another contract address, let's say 50. So we have two keys and two values in our mapping. Now let's see if we can check them out. Okay, so we get the value 50 corresponding to this address key, and then we get the value 100 corresponding to this address key. Now let's check what happens if we remove the value stored against this key. We'll again try to get it, and we get the default UINT value because the value that we had stored there earlier was removed and the default value is 0. Now we'll check out the nested mapping contract. We'll deploy it, and again we have the remove, set and get functions here. Let's take this address and we'll set some values. So we have to pass in one address value as the top level key, and then we have to pass an integer value as the lower level key. Let's pass in true here because false is anyway going to be the default value. So we have one value stored in our nested mapping. Let's store another value in the lower level mapping. We'll make this false. So we have two values stored in our nested mapping. The top level key is this, and the lower level keys are 150. So let's try getting them first. So we'll pass in the address and type in one lower level key. We get the value true, and the other lower level key, we get the value as false. If we want to remove a value, we'll pass in the address, and we passed in 50 here, so we get the value as false. Let's pass 100, so we get the value as true. And if I remove the value stored here, we should get the default value, which is false. So that was mapping and nested mapping for you. I'll see you guys in the next video.